It was a warm evening in Hollywood, and the city was buzzing with excitement. The night was just beginning to unfold, with the glittering lights of the red carpet lighting up the street, and the hum of cameras snapping shots at every angle. It was the kind of night when everything seemed to sparkle, both the stars in the sky and the stars on the ground. People dressed in their finest clothes, hair perfect, makeup flawless, all gathered to celebrate a new film, one that had everyone talking. Among the many faces filling the scene, two stood out. The first was a man with a calm yet undeniable presence. His name had become a synonym for kindness, talent, and respect. He had been in the industry long enough to know the games that people played, the pressure, the expectations, but he had always kept his feet on the ground. He wasn't one to draw attention to himself, but he didn't need to. His aura did that for him. He moved through the crowd with an easy smile, nodding and acknowledging those he passed, but never lingering too long in one place. He wasn't one to seek the spotlight, but the spotlight always seemed to find him. Then there was the woman beside him, who had, over the years, become more than just a talented actress. She had earned the respect of everyone around her. Her kindness was well known, and her sense of humor was something that always brought people together. She wasn't just another pretty face in Hollywood. She was someone who had earned her place through hard work and genuine character. Her laughter filled the air, easy and warm, drawing people in like magnets. They had been through a lot together over the years, their friendship forged through both the fun and the challenges that came with working on a film that would become a classic. Their bond had grown beyond the screen, and they had become each other's support system, both on and off set. They had shared jokes, shared struggles, and shared the kind of unspoken understanding that only comes from years of knowing someone deeply. As they stood together near the edge of the event, talking quietly to each other, the buzz of the crowd continued around them. The flashes of cameras and the low murmur of conversation were constant, but there was a peacefulness in their little corner of the world. It was easy to forget, for just a moment, that they were in one of the most high-pressure industries in the world. Here they were simply two friends enjoying each other's company, both with smiles that could light up the room. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere started to shift, just a little. The sounds of the crowd began to change, and a new energy entered the scene. It wasn't immediately obvious, but it was there. It was subtle at first, a few more voices laughing a bit louder, more people brushing past others as they moved in closer. But soon it became clear. The excitement of the night had given way to something else. A feeling that didn't belong. Sandra, trying to shake off the unease, continued chatting with her friend, laughing at something he had said, but there was a shift in the way her body language changed. She straightened up a little, her smile faltering just for a second. It was small, but it was enough for anyone who knew her well to notice. She had always been the kind of person who could handle herself in any situation. But even she wasn't immune to the occasional discomfort that came with being in a space full of people who didn't always respect personal boundaries. Then, it happened. A figure from the crowd approached her. At first, Sandra didn't pay much attention, thinking it was just another fan looking for a photo or an autograph, which she was used to. But there was something different about this one. He didn't have the usual excitement in his eyes or the polite demeanor that most fans had. Instead, his eyes seemed almost too intense, too focused, as if he was seeing something that wasn't there. The look on his face sent a small chill down Sandra's spine, but she tried to brush it off. She had dealt with worse. The man stopped right in front of her, his breath a little heavier than it should have been for someone just walking up from the crowd. His words came out a little too quickly, a little too forcefully. He didn't ask for a picture or an autograph, but instead made a comment about her that felt too personal, too much for the occasion. It wasn't a question of what he said. It was how he said it. He didn't have the decency to approach her with respect. He seemed to think he had the right to say whatever he wanted to her, no matter how out of line it was. Sandra's smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She was still polite, still trying to maintain the composure she always did in public, but it was obvious to anyone who was paying attention that she wasn't comfortable. She tried to deflect the comment with a light laugh, moving her body just slightly to create more space between them, but he wasn't getting the hint. The man continued, pushing his words further, his voice rising slightly as he spoke to her. It wasn't that Sandra hadn't dealt with attention before. She had. It wasn't even the fact that this man was standing too close. It was the fact that he was crossing a line. She knew it, and she could see that Keanu, standing just a few feet away, had noticed too. The man wasn't done. Sandra could feel her chest tighten as she realized he wasn't going to back off. She was stuck. There were too many people around and he wasn't taking the hint. She took a step back, hoping that maybe some space would make him realize he had gone too far. But he closed the distance between them, his words becoming more intrusive, more aggressive in tone. At that moment, Sandra felt something inside her shift. She had been trying to handle it gracefully, but she realized it wasn't something she could do alone. There was a limit to how much one person should have to tolerate, and this man had found that limit. She glanced over at Keanu, who had been watching the situation unfold. His expression had changed, his calm demeanor replaced by something that made it clear he understood exactly what was happening. He wasn't just standing by watching. He was ready to step in, and Sandra, for the first time that evening, allowed herself to relax a little, knowing that she wasn't in this alone. The air around them seemed to shift again, as if the whole room was waiting for something to happen. Everyone's eyes were on the little interaction taking place, but none more so than Keanu's. He wasn't someone who made a scene, but when it came to those he cared about, especially someone like Sandra, he was prepared to take action. The man had pushed things too far, and now it was time for him to realize that. Sandra didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to ask for help. She just knew that Keanu would be there, and that was enough. The tension in the air was about to break, and everyone around them could feel it. The man, still standing a little too close to Sandra, seemed completely unaware of the discomfort he was causing. His words had no filter, no thought for how they might make her feel. To him, this was just another opportunity to be bold, to make an impression, as if he were the one who had the right to dictate the flow of the conversation. He wasn't just talking to her, he was dominating the moment, pushing his own agenda without even considering that she might not want it. Sandra's smile faded, and for a brief second she wondered how she could get out of this situation. She wasn't one to cause a scene, but her instincts were telling her that this man wasn't going to take a hint. She tried shifting her weight slightly, angling her body away from him, but he mirrored her movements, closing the distance again. It was almost as if he didn't understand social cues, or perhaps he didn't care. The crowd around them continued with their chatter, unaware of what was unfolding in the center of it all. Some people were still taking pictures, a few were laughing. Others were too caught up in their own conversations to notice the tension building. But there were a few who did see it. The subtle shift in Sandra's body language, the unease that had settled over her face. It was clear something was wrong, but it wasn't obvious yet to everyone what it was. Keanu, however, didn't need to be told. He had been watching quietly, his gaze never leaving Sandra and the man who was now crowding her. The way the man stood too close, his hands moving a little too much in conversation, his words too pointed, too familiar, Keanu could see it all. There was something about the way he was speaking to Sandra that felt off. It wasn't just the fact that he was being overly familiar. It was the way he was invading her space. It was a lack of respect, and that was something Keanu couldn't stand. He had known Sandra for years, and there was nothing he valued more than her comfort, her safety. Seeing her in a situation like this lit a fire inside him. He didn't say anything to her. Not yet. Instead, Keanu took a quiet step forward, moving slightly closer to the conversation, but not in an obvious way. He didn't want to alarm anyone or make a scene, but he was ready to act if things escalated. His presence alone, however, seemed to shift the energy. Sandra noticed it immediately, the slight change in the air as Keanu stepped closer, the calm yet unmistakable energy he carried with him. The man, still oblivious, continued. His words were now more forceful, perhaps attempting to make Sandra laugh or smile, but it felt too much like he was pushing her into a reaction she didn't want to give. She wanted to smile, to make it all go away, but she couldn't. His behavior had crossed a line. She didn't know if he was drunk, if he was just being overly confident, or if he truly didn't understand how uncomfortable he was making her, but she could feel every second of it. Her heart was racing just a little faster, and she hated that. She didn't want to feel this way, especially in front of a crowd. She wanted to be the woman who could handle anything, but in that moment she just wanted it to end. Her gaze drifted again, meeting Keanu's eyes. He was watching her, and there was something in his expression that told her he understood exactly what she was going through. She didn't need to say anything. She didn't have to ask for help. She just knew he would be there, ready to step in if she needed him. Keanu didn't hesitate. He wasn't going to stand by and let this go on any longer. He had seen enough. He was never one for confrontation, but when it came to people he cared about, when it came to standing up for what was right, he couldn't just let it slide without a word. He moved closer, his steps calm and deliberate, his eyes never leaving the man's back. The man, too focused on Sandra, didn't notice Keanu's approach until it was too late. Keanu's voice, soft but firm, broke through the man's constant stream of words. "Hey, that's enough." The man stopped talking mid-sentence, his eyes shifting toward Keanu, as if he had just realized someone else was in the conversation now. Keanu stood there, his body slightly angled in a way that put him between Sandra and the man, blocking any further advances. His posture was calm but assertive, there was no mistaking it. Keanu wasn't there to start a fight, but he wasn't going to let this man keep going either. Sandra, still processing the change in the situation, couldn't help but feel a small wave of relief. Keanu hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't been aggressive, but there was something in his tone, in the way he moved, that made it clear he wasn't asking. This was a moment of protection, of respect, and it was exactly what Sandra needed. The man, momentarily thrown off, took a step back. His confidence faltered. He hadn't expected anyone to intervene, especially not someone like Keanu. He seemed to weigh his options for a second, unsure of how to respond. The crowd had started to notice the shift now, their eyes flicking toward the confrontation. Some were even beginning to take their phones out, sensing that something was happening, but no one was speaking up. Everyone was waiting, unsure of what would happen next. Keanu's gaze remained steady and his voice was just as calm as before, though there was a firmness to it now. "You need to leave her alone." The man looked at Keanu for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether to challenge him or back down. But Keanu wasn't giving him the option to argue. His presence, calm as it was, made it clear that this wasn't a conversation he was interested in having. For a moment, there was silence. The man's eyes darted between Keanu and Sandra, and it was almost as if he was trying to figure out if he could still push forward. But there was something in Keanu's unwavering gaze that told him he couldn't. Then, as if realizing he had lost, the man muttered something under his breath, something that sounded like a weak apology, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make up for the fact that he had crossed a line. It wasn't enough to take away the discomfort he had caused, but it was something. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Sandra and Keanu standing there in the middle of the crowd. As the man retreated, the energy in the air changed. The tension that had been hanging there evaporated, leaving behind a strange sense of calm. Sandra, still processing what had just happened, let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She glanced at Keanu, who had already turned back to her, his expression softening. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low and kind. Sandra nodded, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. "Yeah, thanks." Keanu gave a small shrug, the kind of gesture that said he didn't need thanks. "You don't have to thank me. I couldn't just stand there." For a moment, they just stood there, silently taking in the shift in the atmosphere. The world around them had returned to its usual hum, the crowd laughing and talking as if nothing had happened. But Sandra knew something had changed. She felt safer, more grounded, and she knew that she wasn't alone in a situation that could have gone much worse. Keanu had been there, and that made all the difference. The moment the man walked away, the tension in the air seemed to melt away, but not entirely. There was still a residue of discomfort lingering around the edges. Sandra stood there for a second longer, trying to shake off the feeling of having been violated. Even if just for a brief moment, her body was still tight with the remnants of the encounter. But it was easier to breathe now. The crowd around them had returned to their own conversations, as though nothing had happened, but Sandra knew it wasn't the same for her. She couldn't just forget what had happened so easily. Keanu, sensing the change in her energy, turned slightly toward her, his eyes softer now. "You okay?" His voice wasn't probing, just gentle, like he was giving her space but also offering support if she needed it. He wasn't making her feel like she had to answer, but the offer was there, plain and simple. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence said everything. Sandra looked up at him, still processing everything that had just unfolded. It wasn't that she hadn't dealt with difficult situations before, but there was something about this one that had shaken her. There was a part of her that had always tried to deal with everything on her own, to be strong, to handle herself. But there was something different about how Keanu had stepped in. He hadn't asked for anything in return. He hadn't hesitated. He had simply been there, exactly when she needed him. She smiled softly, though it was a little fragile around the edges. "I am now, thanks to you," she said, her voice a little quieter than usual. She wasn't embarrassed, but there was a certain vulnerability that had crept in. It wasn't about being weak. It was just about recognizing that sometimes we all need help. And in that moment, Keanu had been her help. Keanu didn't say anything at first. He just gave a small nod, his eyes still on her. It was clear he wasn't looking for any grand gesture, any big thank you. He wasn't even looking for acknowledgement. He just wanted to make sure she was all right. His calmness was both reassuring and grounding, and Sandra found herself appreciating it more than she had expected. For a moment, they just stood there, the noise of the event fading into the background as they shared this quiet, unspoken understanding. It wasn't something that needed to be explained. They had known each other long enough for these moments to feel natural. Keanu's calmness had always been a source of strength for her, and in this situation it had made all the difference. Sandra finally took a slow breath, her shoulders easing. "I don't know what it is about certain people that makes them think they can just cross boundaries without any thought." Keanu glanced over at her, his expression soft but firm. "Some people think they're entitled to everything. They don't think about how their actions affect others." Sandra nodded, her gaze dropping to the ground for a moment as she took in what he said. She had dealt with her share of pushy people in the industry, people who thought their status gave them permission to act however they wanted. But this situation felt different. It wasn't just the man's words. It was his approach, his insistence that he had a right to invade her space. It had felt invasive, personal, and for the first time in a long while, she had felt helpless in a situation she usually knew how to handle. But now, with Keanu standing beside her, it was as if the weight had been lifted. She wasn't carrying it alone anymore. It wasn't about being able to fight off every uncomfortable moment by herself. It was about knowing that sometimes we need someone to stand beside us, someone who understands that we all have our limits. Keanu turned slightly, his attention back on the event around them, but there was a small smile on his face. It wasn't the kind of smile that said everything was perfect. It was the kind of smile that said he understood, that he was here for her, no questions asked. "That guy was way out of line," Keanu said, his voice quieter now as though he was speaking more to himself than to Sandra. "You don't deserve that. No one does." Sandra gave him a soft smile, her heart warming just a little. "I know, but it's hard to remember that sometimes. You get so used to smiling through the weird moments, pretending everything's fine. But then something like that happens and you realize how important it is to have someone in your corner." Keanu shrugged, the motion effortless. "I'll always be in your corner." The sincerity in his voice made Sandra feel like a weight had been lifted from her chest. She didn't need grand speeches or endless reassurances. She just needed to know that the people she cared about were there when it mattered most. For a few seconds, they both stood there, letting the noise of the event swirl around them. It was funny, Sandra thought, how easy it was to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of Hollywood. The flashing cameras, the expectations, the constant noise. But when things got real, when the walls came down, all of that felt far away. It was just her and Keanu standing together in the middle of everything, but also outside of it all. A few moments passed before Sandra finally spoke again. "You know, I've never really been the type to let things like that bother me, but I think tonight just caught me off guard. It's been a long few months, a lot of pressure. And that guy, well, he just seemed like the last straw." Keanu nodded, understanding without needing to ask more. "It's okay. We all have those moments. We think we can handle everything, and then something happens and we realize we're not invincible, and that's okay too." Sandra felt a warmth spread through her chest. Keanu had this way of putting things into perspective, of making her feel like it was okay to not always have everything under control. She didn't have to be the perfect version of herself all the time. It was okay to have moments where she felt shaken or vulnerable. And as much as Sandra hated feeling vulnerable, she was beginning to understand that it was these moments that made life real, that made friendships deeper. It wasn't about being strong all the time. It was about being able to lean on the people who truly cared when it counted. The sound of cameras flashing broke through the quiet moment they were having, pulling Sandra's attention back to the reality of the event. The night was far from over. There were still interviews to be done, more guests to meet, and a whole host of things that would demand her attention. But for now, in this brief interlude, she felt at peace. Keanu seemed to sense the shift, his expression turning a little more playful as he glanced back at her. "You ready to face the rest of this circus?" he asked with a raised eyebrow, the hint of a grin tugging at the corner of his lips. Sandra couldn't help but laugh, the sound light and freeing. "As ready as I'll ever be. Thanks again, by the way. I don't know what I would have done without you." Keanu gave her that same easy shrug, his smile growing just a little wider. "Anytime. That's what friends are for." And with that, they both moved away from the edge of the crowd, re-entering the fray of the evening, but with a renewed sense of strength between them. Sandra knew the rest of the night would be just as hectic, just as full of cameras and questions, but she also knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The night continued, but it felt different. The moment with the man earlier had changed something in the air, but in an unexpected way. It wasn't the tension or the awkwardness that lingered. It was more like a shift in perspective. The evening no longer felt like a performance, like everyone was just putting on a show for the cameras. For Sandra, and even for Keanu, it felt like the noise of the world had faded away, leaving behind the simple truth of their friendship. As they moved through the crowd again, Sandra couldn't help but notice how the evening had turned a bit more relaxed. The glitz and glamour of the red carpet still hung in the air, and the flashing cameras were as constant as ever. But something about the way Keanu moved through the crowd, so effortlessly, so unbothered, seemed to make everything else fall away. It was like he had this ability to be in the moment, no matter what was going on around him. Sandra tried to keep up with the conversations happening around her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to what had just happened. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be that exposed in a public setting, to be so visibly unsettled. But Keanu had been there. She couldn't stop thinking about how he had stepped in without a second thought, how he had made sure she was okay without making her feel weak for needing that support. She had always prided herself on handling things on her own, but tonight, she had realized just how much it meant to have someone like Keanu in her corner. They were walking toward a small gathering of friends and colleagues now, and Sandra felt her focus shift. The group greeted them with smiles and light conversation, but Sandra felt a little distant. She wasn't in the mood for small talk. The earlier moment had left her feeling a bit raw, and even though she was trying to act like everything was fine, it was clear to Keanu that something was still off. He kept his distance but remained close, just enough to be a presence without crowding her. He wasn't trying to force her to open up. He was just letting her be, which was exactly what she needed. As the evening continued, they were asked to pose for pictures, which Sandra usually didn't mind, but tonight it felt like another task. She smiled for the cameras, turning her head this way and that, striking poses she had done 1,000 times before. But this time it wasn't as effortless as usual. She could feel the weight of the camera lenses on her, not just because she was a public figure, but because, in the back of her mind, she was still processing the uncomfortable interaction with the man earlier. She found herself trying too hard to look natural, which only made everything feel more forced. Keanu, on the other hand, had a way of handling these moments that was completely different. He didn't seem to mind the flashes. He wasn't trying to be anyone else. He was just himself, and that made all the difference. When the photographers asked him to do a specific pose, he did it with a casual ease, as if he were just having a conversation with them, not performing for them. It was this effortless grace that Sandra admired so much about him. There was no artifice in the way he carried himself. After a few more minutes of posing, the group was asked to move toward the main event, an after-party that was just beginning to kick off. The music was louder now, the lights brighter, and the energy in the air had shifted from the formal red carpet excitement to something a little more relaxed and informal. People were letting loose, laughing and drinking, and the whole atmosphere felt a little more human. Sandra found herself slowly letting go of the tension in her body, her shoulders relaxing just a little. As they entered the party, she felt a change in her mood. It wasn't just the energy of the crowd, it was the fact that she wasn't alone. Keanu was there beside her, and that made all the difference. The night had felt like it was closing in on her before, but now, with a few more familiar faces around them and Keanu keeping close, it felt easier to breathe. They grabbed a couple of drinks and made their way toward a quieter corner. Sandra didn't want to be in the center of the chaos, and Keanu, being the easygoing guy he was, didn't mind. They found a small table near the back, where they could watch the crowd without being in the thick of it. It was one of those moments where everything just felt right. No expectations, no pressure, just two friends enjoying a quiet moment amidst the noise. "So what's next?" Sandra asked, breaking the silence between them. She wasn't really asking about the event, but more about the night ahead. What was the plan? Was there something they should be doing, or was it just about enjoying the moment? Keanu took a sip of his drink, looking thoughtful. "I think it's just about being here right now. We don't have to do anything." "It's all good." Sandra smiled, appreciating his laid-back perspective. She envied how easily he could let go of the need to always be doing something, always striving toward the next thing. She had spent so much of her life working, pushing for more, thinking there was always something more to achieve, and yet here he was, perfectly content to just exist in the moment. It was a reminder that sometimes just being was enough. They spent the next few hours talking casually, watching the party unfold around them. It was easy to forget the stress of the world when they were together. Conversations flowed effortlessly, whether they were talking about the absurdities of the film industry or simply reminiscing about the first time they'd met. There was no pressure to perform, no need for small talk. With Keanu, Sandra felt like she could simply be herself. No masks, no pretenses. At one point, a friend from the film set joined them at their table, and the conversation turned to the movie they had just wrapped. They laughed about the ridiculous moments behind the scenes, the ones that had never made it to the screen but had kept everyone in stitches during filming. Sandra found herself genuinely laughing, her earlier discomfort forgotten in the ease of the conversation. As the night wore on, the party started to thin out. Some people were leaving, others were moving to the dance floor, but Sandra and Keanu stayed where they were, enjoying the quiet comfort of each other's company. The world around them had started to feel distant again, but in a good way. It wasn't that they were ignoring everything around them. It was more like they had found their own little bubble, a space where everything else could just fade into the background. Finally, as the night started winding down and the music got quieter, Keanu stood up, stretching a little. "You ready to call it a night?" he asked, offering her a hand. Sandra looked around, the energy of the event slowly beginning to settle. She realized she was ready. Not just to leave the event, but to take a breath and step away from everything for a while. The night had turned out better than she expected, but more than that, she realized how much it had meant to her to have Keanu there with her. The way he had stepped in when she needed him, how he had made everything feel lighter without even trying. It was something she hadn't even realized she needed until now. She took his hand, standing up from the table, feeling a strange sense of peace. "Yeah, I think it's time," she said with a smile. "Thanks for sticking around." Keanu gave her that same warm smile, the kind that made her feel like everything was going to be all right. Always. "Let's get out of here." And as they walked toward the exit, away from the flashing lights and the noise, Sandra felt something shift within her. She wasn't just relieved that the night had ended without any more drama. She was grateful for the way things had unfolded, for the quiet moments, for the chance to let go, and for Keanu, who had reminded her that sometimes the best thing you can do is just be there for someone. No more, no less. As they walked out of the event, the crisp night air hit them like a wave, refreshing and grounding at the same time. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but everything around them felt quieter now, the chaos of the party fading as they left it behind. Sandra took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night lift off her shoulders. She wasn't sure exactly what she had expected when she'd first stepped into the event. But this wasn't it. In a way, it had turned out better than she could have imagined. More meaningful, more real. The car ride to their hotel was peaceful. Keanu had insisted on driving, despite Sandra's offer to call a cab. He wasn't in a hurry, and neither was she. It wasn't about the destination anymore. It was about the time they spent together, the silence between them that wasn't uncomfortable but comfortable in its own right. The world outside seemed distant, almost as if they had entered their own little bubble. Sandra glanced out the window, watching the city pass by. It felt like everything had slowed down, like the speed of the world had reduced just for them. Keanu kept his eyes on the road, his expression calm and collected as always. It was as if he didn't let anything rattle him. Sandra appreciated that about him, the way he could stay grounded no matter what was going on around him. It was something she had admired since they had first met. And now, after everything that had happened tonight, it seemed even more remarkable. The car finally pulled into the hotel parking lot, the soft hum of the engine winding down as Keanu parked the car. He turned off the engine and looked over at Sandra, the same calmness in his eyes. "So how do you feel?" Sandra paused, unsure of how to put it into words. It wasn't just about the night. It wasn't just about the uncomfortable encounter earlier, or even the party. It was everything. The weight of the world she had been carrying around for so long and how much lighter she felt now. She smiled softly, a real smile this time. "I feel okay, more than okay, actually. I didn't think I'd feel this way tonight, but here we are." Keanu chuckled quietly, looking pleased but not surprised. "I'm glad. You deserve to feel okay." Sandra met his gaze, the warmth in his words wrapping around her like a blanket. There was something about the way he said it, so simple and genuine, that made her heart a little lighter. It wasn't a grand statement, but it was exactly what she needed to hear. For so long she had carried the weight of everything on her own, thinking that asking for help or even showing vulnerability was a weakness. But tonight Keanu had shown her that it wasn't. It wasn't weak to let someone in. It wasn't weak to lean on others when you needed it most. "I don't think I've said it enough," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But thank you for being there tonight. I don't know what I would have done without you." Keanu shrugged, but there was something in the way he did it that made it clear he didn't need any more gratitude. He wasn't doing it for praise or recognition. He was doing it because that was just who he was. "You don't need to thank me. You'd do the same for me." Sandra nodded, appreciating the simplicity of that response. It wasn't about any big gesture or flashy display of loyalty. It was about the quiet moments, the unspoken support, the kind of friendship that didn't demand anything in return. Just being there for each other when it mattered most. They both stepped out of the car and walked into the hotel lobby, the quiet buzz of the night now settling in around them. Sandra was grateful for the peace of the space, the soft lighting and the quiet hum of conversations around them. It felt good to be in a place that didn't demand anything, a place where they could just be themselves. Keanu turned to Sandra as they walked toward the elevator. "You sure you're good for the night? I can hang out for a bit longer if you want." Sandra smiled again, this time feeling more confident, more grounded. "I think I'll be all right. I just need a little time to wind down. But thanks for offering. I'm lucky to have you as a friend." Keanu smiled back, that familiar, warm smile that made everything feel right. "Anytime. Take care of yourself, and if you need anything, just text me." Sandra nodded, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't expected. "I will, I promise." They exchanged a final glance before she stepped into the elevator, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. As the doors closed, she leaned against the wall, allowing herself to simply breathe. The events of the night had unfolded in ways she hadn't anticipated. But now that she was alone in her room, she felt the exhaustion of the day finally catch up to her. The weight of the world, which had been so heavy earlier, now felt manageable. Maybe it wasn't about solving every problem at once or always being in control. Maybe it was about knowing that you didn't have to face everything on your own. As she lay in bed that night, her mind replayed the moments of the evening. The uncomfortable interaction with the man, the way Keanu had stepped in without a second thought, the quiet moments they shared, and the peaceful end to a long day. She realized that what had made the night so special wasn't the event itself, but the way it had reminded her of the importance of having people in your corner, the kind of people who didn't need anything from you, who simply showed up when it mattered. In the end, it wasn't about fame or success. It wasn't about the cameras or the red carpet. It was about the moments of real connection, the kind that didn't have to be explained, the kind that just existed quietly but profoundly. And for Sandra, that was the most important thing she could take from tonight. As she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of gratitude for everything that had happened, and for the people who had helped her along the way. Keanu's support had been a reminder that sometimes, the best things in life weren't the ones you worked hardest for. Sometimes it was just about being there, in the quiet moments offering a little kindness, and letting the rest of the world fade into the background. The night had ended, But the feeling of peace would stay with her for much longer.